Welcome to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser, and I'm here to tell you that we are living in a post-industrial cargo cult. What's a cargo cult, you ask? According to Wikipedia, a cargo cult is a religious practice that has appeared in many traditional pre-industrial tribal societies in the wake of interaction with technologically advanced cultures. The cults focus on obtaining the material wealth, i.e. the cargo, of the advanced culture through magic and religious rituals and practices. Kind of like pressing Control print. Today we are all post-industrial cargo in a cult called Keynesianism. The ritual act of printing money itself, we are told by our cult leaders like Jim Jones and his Kool-Aid, Ben Bernanke and his printing, will lead to a future of material wealth and prosperity for all. All on board the Hale-Bopp comet, maybe. And it is banking transactions at an ever-increasing rate which mimic a real booming economy in which real businesses are being built and growing that we are told will boost our GDP. And as rich societies consume many goods, our cult leaders say, go shopping, because surely then we will all become rich. And so we eat and consume, we consume housing, and we have bubbles and housing, and bond bubbles, and equity bubbles, and tech bubbles, and green bubbles. Eat and consume, transact and print. But the cargo, well, that never actually gets here. Stacey?
Yes, Max. Now everybody knows we've deindustrialized, so we're post-industrial, and just look at Detroit. And we seem to have forgotten how it is that we built these big economies, how we made these airplanes and sent men to the moon, how we were able to create these. And like we saw in the Pacific Islands, there was a lot of cargo cult activity there, because during the World War II, all these Japanese and U.S. military bases were established there. And the tribes there saw all these planes coming in, and the planes brought with them all sorts of material wealth, cargo. And in an attempt to attract further deliveries of goods once the war ended, followers of the cults in these Pacific Islands engaged in ritualistic practices such as building crude imitation landing strips, aircraft and radio equipment, and mimicking the behavior that they had observed of the military personnel operating them. So the islanders began concocting headphones made out of coconuts, and they would sit up in a in a sort of fabricated control tower. They would also wave the landing signals while standing on these crude runways that they had built. So they would be waving to planes that weren't there, but thought by the act of doing that, the plane would deliver some cargo, material wealth to them.
Okay, so we're in a post-industrial society where money printing is not creating any growth. We've had trillions, tens of trillions of new dollars and yen and euros printed over the past few years, but there hasn't been any sustainable or meaningful GDP growth. However, the people in charge, like the cargo cult people, they mimic the actions from when it did work. It used to work that if you hit the print button, it used to generate some GDP growth, but it doesn't work anymore. But it doesn't stop them from, like a mad cult, continuing to mimic what those actions that seem to be correlated to GDP growth.
Well, it was a little bit the opposite. The GDP growth came first. We were building things, we were manufacturing, we were creating wealth. And because of that, there was a demand for more currency to keep the system operating. So they remember that they had to print a lot of money, that the money supply was booming along with the economy. And now they only remember that there was a lot of money. Maybe that's the answer. If we keep on printing money, then the wealth creation will come afterward.
Right, so it's cognitive dissonance, isn't it? And if they were going to mimic an action to generate real wealth, they would maybe do this, which is sewing. Or they would do this, manufacturing something at the metal printing factory. But no, they do this, and this is money printing, which is not generating any growth, and they don't understand why, because they don't understand they don't know how to manufacture anymore in the UK or in the US. They don't know what it means. They don't know where shoes come from. They don't know that there used to be a place called a factory where you made a shoe and the person making the shoe got a wage, and that created capital that created something called free market capitalism. They don't know anything about that anymore. They just see goods arriving at the shops. They just use debt and credit cards to buy those things, and to get more of that debt into their system to buy more stuff, they mimic the central banker who's just doing like a cargo cult. They're mimicking an action. Oh, you know, do this, do this.
So at every level, whether it's government, individual, or corporate or banking sector, we all do behave in this way where we're putting like coconut earphones on and sitting up in a fabricated control tower, and that is supposed to make us wealthy, whether we're participating in a housing bubble or printing at the central bank or transacting. Remember, for the banking sector, they think that just transacting, because there were a lot of transaction when there was a lot of real deals and business and things happening.
We saw that with Mark Carney. He was testifying in the Treasury Select Committee here in the UK recently, and they asked him, what about this economy? How do we get things going? And like a part of a cargo cult, you know, he put on the coconut heads and he started making gestures like bringing in the cargo planes and doing incantations like a witch doctor. And of course the people who were asking him questions were like, that's fantastic. When do we get the stuff? When do we get the goods? And he kept mimicking these arcane symbolic gestures that are not tied to anything having to do with a real economy.
And here we have a headline from Lord Adair Turner, who is the outgoing head of the Financial Services Authority. So here's one headline on that level. Lord Turner lets the cat out of the bag. Print money to fund spending. Lord Turner, the departing chairman of the Financial Services Authority, has defended financing government spending by printing money, arguing that within limits, it absolutely definitively does not lead to inflation.
Yeah, I read a story in the Telegraph that gave a history of governments that have resorted to printing money to stimulate growth. Did it lead to inflation? They had 5 examples. In 4 out of the 5 examples, it led to either high or hyperinflation, with the exception being the U.S. after World War II, but of course they had the world reserve currency that just won World War II, and there was a gold standard. So you can't even include that in the examples. But in all the other examples, it most definitely did lead to higher inflation, and in some cases hyperinflation. We already see it here in the UK. The real inflation here is now just around 8% for people who are shopping in the high street for food and energy, not the 2.7% that the government erroneously reports.
So now we go to the normal human individual, the participant in the economy. They are in a post-industrial economy. They forgot how to create wealth, how to make a living. So they're out there on the runway with their fake signals, hoping that, and this is the act of using credit cards, right? Because they don't have jobs. Since 1971, jobs have plummeted, real income and wealth have plummeted in the United States.
It's not the return of disco.
No.
No. This is a cargo cult.
Yeah.
Symbolic message of degradation. If it was disco, we could hope for real, genuine inflation, because back in the 70s, yeah, that was when you actually had inflation.
Well, the United States of debt addiction, $16.7 trillion. That is our current national debt. $12.8 trillion. That is the amount households carry in mortgage and consumer debt. We are now addicted to debt to lubricate the wheels of our financial system. There is nothing wrong with debt per se, but it is safe to say that too much debt relative to how much revenue is being produced is a sign of economic problems. Again, you know, back during World War II, during these original cargo cults, we had a lot of debt, government debt, but it was going into building goods and services and infrastructure, and now it's just, we've got rid of all that, the things that might lead to wealth production eventually. Instead, we just have the debt, and we think accumulating the debt will somehow make us wealthy.
Right. I mean, it's the idea of, do we need more aggregate demand, or do we need some aggregate supply? So the Keynesians out there believe that it's all about aggregate demand, because 70% of the economy is consumption. So we need to stoke consumption with cheaper rates. But without supply, stuff that's being manufactured for wages that would foster savings would be, of course, the backbone of a capital. So you can't have capitalism without capital. Then if everyone's trying to aggregate demand from each other, you end up with what we have now, which is a currency war.
Well, you mentioned the savings, and one thing that Ben Bernanke, who calls himself a student of the Great Depression, when they look back, these cargo cultists in the central banks look back at the Great Depression, they see that savings rate